Okay, back to the dinam of, we finished Kibbutz Avayim. We're discussing the respect for scholars and teachers and rebbes and all that. Okay, so we learned that if a rebbe is walking in the middle, in the street, he walks in the middle, the greater student walks on his right, a little bit behind him, the lesser student walks on the left, a little bit behind him, and so on. It's a very big sin to embarrass scholars or to hate them. And the Gemara says Yerushalayim was destroyed because they embarrassed and despised the scholars, the Talmidei Chachamim. So therefore it says, it says like this: whoever embarrasses the scholars, the Talmidei Chachamim, they have no chelik in olam haba. They have no share in the world to come. And it says, Dvar Hashem Baza, they actually shame the word of Hashem. So therefore the din is, you're not allowed to embarrass scholars, you're not allowed to despise scholars, you're not allowed to hate the scholars, and they have to be treated with respect.
Is it scholars or Talmidei Chacham?
Talmidei Chacham, by definition, is scholars. Now we're going to learn soon.
A chemist, PhD chemist could be a scholar.
No, we're talking about Yiddish scholars. By the way, soon in the Kitzur is going to say an interesting din that a person might be very learned, but if he's not meticulous in mitzvahs, he's mezalzel b'mitzvahs, means he doesn't keep mitzvahs properly, he just laughs at mitzvahs, and he has no fear of Hashem, so that he doesn't have a din of his scholars. They call like the kal shebekalim, the lowest of the low. In other words, because the definition of a Talmid Chacham is one not only that knows a lot of wisdom, but actually lives with the Torah. That's a real Talmid Chacham. That he has Yirah Shamayim, fear of heaven, and all that stuff. That's the real definition of a Talmid Chacham. In fact, these dinim are questionable if they apply today. But, for instance, in halacha it says like this: if a Talmid Chacham is in business, like we know many people at the Gemara were business people. Now, Papa and Hillel, a lot of them were very wealthy, in fact. There were wine merchants, beer merchants, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, wood choppers. Some of them were extremely, extremely wealthy in the Gemara. Even Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was very wealthy. So it says, if he has merchandise to sell in a city, nobody is allowed to sell their merchandise until the Talmid Chacham gets rid of his. So these dinim don't apply today because the question if we really have a din of a Talmid Chacham today. No, that's what it says in halacha. But it says, but if there's one second. Yeah, that's the din. That's only if there's no goy around that buys and sells. Because then the Talmid Chacham will gain the money, whatever. But bottom line is, it shows the respect of the scholar, that the scholar needs to be treated in such a way that even if he has merchandise to sell, you have to allow him to sell it first. Now, what happens if somebody is known to be a very big scholar, and he knows Torah, all the places, and he, so such a scholar is freed from paying the community taxes. In other words, years ago when they lived in the small shtetl where the Jews controlled the shtetl, so there was a tax that the community council, what's called in the Gemara, it's called the Shiva Tuvei Ha'ir, the 7 board members of the city council. That's what it's called. In the time of the Gemara, that Zayin Tuvei Ha'ir, which means the board of the city was 7 people. And they made all the decisions for the city. So then the din was, the Talmid Chacham, even if he's wealthy, didn't have to pay most of the taxes. For instance, some of the taxes, they said they needed for shmira, for protection. They needed for protection. So he said the Talmid Chacham, his Torah protects him, so he doesn't have to pay taxes for shmira, or things like that. Okay, now, next thing is like this. If there's a Kohen and a Levi and a Yisrael, now we know there's a mitzvah in the Torah, v'kidashtem, you have to sanctify the Kohanim. What do you mean sanctify the Kohanim? They get called up to first Aliyah, whenever there's anything, they should go first, they lead the benching, whatever it may be, there's a mitzvah to honor Kohanim. Now, in the Gemara, this doesn't apply today, but in Talmudic law, in the Mishnah, that is like this. If the Kohen and the Levi and Yisrael were equal knowledgeable, they were the same level of Talmidei Chachamim, then the Kohen would be given the honor first. Okay? Because it says, V'kidashtei, everything you have to make him first. Kirsatera, first speaker, he sits at the head, he leads the benching, you give him the best thing. Now, what happens if the Yisrael or the Levi are a greater scholar than the Kohen? Kohen's not such a big scholar, and then Yisrael and the Levi are big scholars. So then the din is, then you give it to the scholar first, not to the Kohen. This din that Kohanim come first in Talmudical times was only when they were equal in wisdom. The Mishnah Hariya says, Talmud Chacham Mamzer Koidem L'Koyin Gadol Amoretz. A Talmud Chacham, even if he's a mamish a mamzer, illegitimate child, a mamzer, he has preference before a Kohen Gadol who's an Amoretz, who's an illiterate. Why? The Gemara learns it out from a pasuk. It says, Yikarehi mipninim, simply means Torah is more precious than pearls. But the Gemara learns, Yikarehi, Torah is more precious, mipninim, from a Kohen Gadol who goes lifnai v'lifnim all the way inside the Beis Hamikdash to the Holy of Holies. Why? In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, a Kohen Gadol didn't have to be a scholar. How was he chosen? It could be his father was a Kohen Gadol, so he automatically has first rights to Kohen Gadol, unless if he's not worthy of it in behavior. But let's say he has Yiras Shamayim. So then he would technically be able to be counted as a Kohen Gadol. Okay? In the second Beis Hamikdash time, for sure. There were 200 or something Kohanim Gedolim. In his day, there was a Kohen Gadol every year. Okay? So in Talmudical times, the Mishnah said, in fact, there's a very interesting story. I think it was with the Shagas Sarya. Shagas Sarya was very old yeshiva Bochum know Shagas Sarya. Shagas Sarya learned through Shas 600 times, he writes. He was very young, sharp, and very chutzpahdik. But he was a massive scholar. For one time, there was an old rabbi preaching in a city who happened to be a Kohen. So when he was Shagas Sarya, you know how to learn extremely well. So he was fighting the whole time with this old rabbi, who was a Kohen, about his lecture. Finally, the old rabbi said to him, there's a Gemara that says, Kivin the chotzev kulahai shmami no mamzeru. The fact that a person has so much chutzpah, it proves he's a mamzer. But that's one of the ways he knew Yoshka was a mamzer, without getting into that now. So it says that, so the Gemara says, Kivin the chotzev kulahai shmami no mamzeru. So the guy, this old rabbi, was a Kohen, screamed out to the Shagas Sarya, you're a mamzer, because you have such chutzpah. So Shagas Sarya answered him this Mishnah, that a Talmud Chacham, who's a mamzer, comes before a Kohen Gadol who's an illiterate. So he basically said, I might be a mamzer, but you're an illiterate, and even if you're a Kohen, so I come first anyway. But the poskim late, contemporary, I mean, not only contemporary, later poskim write that today we don't do that. Because who's going to start measuring, who knows how to learn better, the Kohen or the Yisrael or this guy. So today, the accepted minig is in the world, this is what it says in halacha, that a Kohen goes first. As long as he's not a Kohen who commits sins that a Kohen is not allowed to do. For instance, if you have a Kohen that goes to cemeteries, or a Kohen married a woman he's not allowed to marry, so then he's not a Kohen. You don't give him the first aliyah, don't give him Kohen, you don't, because he loses his Kohen status. What?
So you're supposed to ask him.
If what?
If you know he's married to a goy, then you can't give him an aliyah. Right? But if you don't know,
You can't give him an aliyah because?
he's intermarried.
You saw that's intermarried. You can give an aliyah.
Yeah.
So what's the difference of kohen? I'm asking you. Okay, but you can't give him kohen. A kohen is married to a convert. A kohen is married to a divorcee. A kohen is married to a woman that was married to a guy. All these cases, it's biblically forbidden for the kohen to marry that woman. So then, if a kohen is married to that woman, he's still living with her. So then you can't give him an aliyah kohen.
But we don't have these.
What?
You know, like not to give him because he's. Yeah.
I mean, there has to be certain criteria. He's married to the guy. Yeah, there's. Yeah. What?
Supposed to ask him?
No, you don't. A guy walks into Shok. Are you serious? Are you a mamzer? Are you a Jew? Are you a Presbyterian? What? You ask people questions. But if you know,
Just avoid giving.
if a guy says he's a kohen, halachically you have to believe him that he's a kohen. Nowadays, at least.
You go to the shul, and all of them Kohanim. Who go first to the Torah?
The one that runs the quickest.
Huh? What is that, sir? Yeah, but everybody is Kohen.
No.
There is no Levi, there is no Israel.
So there's a whole Gemara about Ir Shekula Kohanim. It's a din Shulchan Aruch. If it's everybody is a kohen, every aliyah is a kohen.
Who make the Berchat Kohanim?
All of them.
All of them except one that stays in the crowd to accept the bracha.
How do you decide which
To
one?
accept, they decide between themselves.
What is that, sir? Sorry.
If they're all kohanim,
Yeah.
so one guy doesn't do birchat kohanim, he's the crowd, and all the kohanim give him a bracha. What? You say something? Oh.
I'm saying, how could it happen? He said, well, what if it's a family of Kohanim and they're all together?
By the way, just for the record, it's not an uncommon shaila. A family goes away for a Shabbaton, or there's a family simcha. Okay, I have this a bunch of times. Oh, they're all Levim. The bigger problem is when one or two guys are not Levim. Then where do you stick them in? Let's say you have 1,000,000 of Kohanim except there's 2 Yisraelim. So then you just can't give Kohen. There's a whole order in Shechunah, in the Poskim. It says exactly what to do in each scenario, what you do, how do you give, which aliyah you give, whom and when, and that's what you do. But it's not uncommon. People have a bar mitzvah, they go wait to a Shabbaton or whatever it is, and it's a whole mishpacha, yeah? And they're all Levim. So what do you do? So there's a halacha what to do. Okay. Okay, next thing is you're not allowed to, this also it says in halacha today, they make a lot in this. Technically, you cannot use a kohen to do things for you. You can't use a kohen. It's like Me'el Behegdish, and even though we don't have Kabbanis today, but if the kohen forgives his Meichel, then you could. But if a kohen says, I don't want, you can't ask a kohen to do something. But there's a Rabbi Kiva Eger, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Kiva Eger says that if it's a Rebbe of a Kohen, then the Rebbe can ask the Kohen because it's a student, so even though he's a Kohen, he can ask him to do things. Even though normally you don't do. But today, the assumption is the Kohenim are Meichel. You know, basically, according to this halacha, if you're sitting at the table and you say to a kohen, do me a favor, bring me the bottle of soda here, you're not supposed to do it. But today, most of the kohenim are meichel on the covered, and therefore it doesn't matter if they do it. It could be done and it's not a problem. Okay. There's another, okay, one more, yeah. Without a bracha, you can't make a bracha.
I mean, not a bracha, just say...
You could say, Yivreach Hashem v'yishmerecha, every Jew could say it 100 times a day. Really, I'm saying, everybody can say, Yivrach Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yar Hashem panavela. You can say it. He can't do it with a bracha. That's the minigan outside the Sfardim and outside Eretz Yisrael is we do it only on Yom Tov, only on Chag, with the bracha. You could do whatever you want, as long as there's no dog do around and the street is clean. You could say Psukim of Torah. Say Psukim of Torah, you could do it. In Shulchan Aruch, Rebbe says, by the way, an interesting din, that what happens if there's no Kohen and you give a Levi next? In other words, once there's no Kohen, technically Yisrael Levi, it doesn't matter. But in Shulchan Aruch, Rebbe brings down that if you give a Levi first, you live long. V'yirich and Yomim.